Most men think women are looking for perfection, a fancy car, perfect jawline, thick bank account. But here's the truth: most men never hear women aren't looking for perfect. They're looking for strong. Not strong like how much you can lift or how loud you can speak, but strong in how you lead yourself, strong in how you carry your energy, strong in how you handle pressure, strong in how safe she feels in your presence without you saying a word. But here's where it gets brutal. Most men are walking around completely unaware of how weak they actually appear. Not because they're bad men, but because they've never been told the subtle ways women perceive weakness, and how those small behaviors kill attraction, destroy respect, and silently push her away. Today, I'm going to give you the brutal truth: the 7 ways women see you're weak, even when you think you're doing everything right. These aren't obvious flaws, they're often disguised as nice guy behavior or emotional openness or sensitivity. But when they're not balanced by masculine strength, they make her feel what no woman ever wants to feel around a man: disgust, disconnect, and distrust. Let's go deep. 1. You seek her approval instead of standing in your truth. This is one of the biggest, most unattractive forms of weakness: approval seeking. And women see it instantly. It shows up when you change your opinions to match hers, when you laugh at jokes you don't find funny just to keep her interested, when you over explain yourself, when you're scared to disagree, when you ask, "Are you mad at me?" a little too often. Here's the truth: every time you abandon your truth to gain her favor, you lose a piece of her respect. A woman doesn't want a man who tiptoes. She wants a man who stands. A man who listens but doesn't fold. A man who values her input but doesn't betray his own voice to get validation. She doesn't need you to agree. She needs you to be solid. So ask yourself, are you connecting from truth or trying to please? She feels the difference. 2. You get emotionally rattled too easily. Every man feels emotion, but how he holds that emotion defines his strength. When you get easily triggered, whether it's her testing you, pulling away, being distant, or expressing her own emotions, and you spiral into neediness, anger, passive aggression, or begging, she sees it as weakness. Not because emotion is bad, but because it shows that you're ruled by the external, not anchored internally. A woman will test you, not to hurt you, but to feel your frame. She wants to feel that even in her storm, you remain the mountain. If you collapse at the first sign of drama or disconnection, you're not safe. And if you're not safe, she won't surrender. She won't, and she won't trust. So next time you feel the fire rise, breathe. Center yourself. Respond, don't react. Because the man who can feel everything and still choose presence, that's the man she can follow anywhere. 3. You over-explain yourself and try to justify everything. This one is subtle but deadly. When you constantly explain why you did what you did, why you said what you said, why you didn't text back right away, why you feel the way you feel, you are unconsciously saying, "I need you to understand me so you don't reject me." That's weakness. A strong man can express himself clearly and let it land without needing a pat on the back. He doesn't try to win her approval with explanations. He doesn't try to avoid tension by softening every edge. He speaks with clarity and then allows her to process it without trying to manage her perception. Over-explaining is a nervous habit rooted in fear, and women smell that fear instantly. Sometimes strength isn't saying less, but meaning every word. 4. You apologize for being masculine. We live in a culture that's confused masculinity with toxicity. And because of that, many men shrink themselves. They hesitate to lead. They overcorrect. They suppress their desires. They become harmless. And here's what you need to understand: harmless is not attractive. Harmless is not trustworthy. Harmless is not strong. Women don't want a man who's aggressive, but they desperately want a man who is unapologetically masculine. Grounded, directional, protective, bold, sexual, clear. If you're constantly diluting yourself to avoid being too much, you'll never be enough in her eyes. Because you're hiding your edge. Stop apologizing for wanting her. Stop apologizing for leading. Stop apologizing for expressing your truth. Be kind, but don't be timid. Be respectful, but don't be spineless. Be conscious, but don't be neutered. Your masculinity, when anchored in integrity, is not a problem, it's her deepest craving. 5. You avoid conflict instead of leaning into it with calm. Here's a hard truth: the man who avoids conflict is not safe. Because life is full of friction. Relationships come with tension. And if you're the guy who says, "I just want peace," so you avoid every hard conversation, you are not peaceful, you are weak. And women feel it. They don't need a man who picks fights, but they do need a man who won't run from one. A man who can hold space when she's emotional. A man who can set a boundary without flinching. A man who can disagree with love and still lead. When you avoid conflict, you betray the relationship. Because you're not protecting her from discomfort. You're protecting yourself from confrontation. Big difference. She doesn't trust the man who avoids the fire. She trusts the one who can walk through it with love and strength at the same time. 6. You put her on a pedestal. This is where a lot of men lose their power. They finally meet a beautiful, smart, feminine woman, and they start treating her like a goddess, while treating themselves like a servant. They agree with everything. They go out of their way to impress. They abandon their routines, their boundaries, their principles, all to keep her happy. And what they don't realize is this: the moment you pedestalize her, she starts to lose attraction. Not because she wants to be disrespected, but because you've forgotten your value. You've put her above you, and in doing so, you've forced her to look down. You cannot lead someone you idolize. You cannot create polarity from a place of submission. You cannot build trust by inflating her and shrinking yourself. A woman wants to feel cherished, not worshipped, desired, not defied, so love her fully. But keep your crown on 7. You constantly seek reassurance instead of creating certainty. This is one of the biggest attraction killers in relationships. Needing constant reassurance. Do you still love me? Are we okay? Did I do something wrong? Do you think I'm enough for you? These questions might seem innocent, but over time, they exhaust a woman's feminine energy. Why? Because it's not her job to make you feel certain about yourself. She wants to feel your strength, not manage your insecurity. Now listens, everyone needs love. Everyone wants to feel wanted. But when your sense of self depends on her validation, you've handed over your masculine power, you've made her your emotional lifeline. That's not intimacy, that's dependency. A strong man creates certainty from within. He checks in, yes, but not to seek approval. He stays connected, yes, but not to be emotionally babysat. You don't need constant reassurance, you need to return to your center, and when you do, she stops pulling away. Because now she feels anchored, now she feels safe. Now she feels turned on, not by your words, but by your energy. So what now? You might be seeing yourself in some of these 7 signs. Good. Because now you're aware. And awareness is power. You don't fix this by overcompensating or pretending to be alpha. You fix this by doing the inner work, by reconnecting to your masculine core, by learning to regulate your emotions, speak your truth, set boundaries, hold presence, and lead with love, but never from weakness. Understand this: women want to trust you. They want to relax around you. They want to feel safe in your leadership. But they can't and won't if you keep giving your power away in subtle, unconscious ways. The moment you stop chasing validation, the moment you stop apologizing for your edge, the moment you stop fearing her emotions and start standing in your own, that's the moment everything changes. Final words: she doesn't lose respect for you because you make mistakes. She loses respect when you show no spine, no frame, and no fire. She doesn't stop loving you because you're not perfect. She stops loving when she can't feel your presence. When you shrink, when you fold, when you disappear into emotional softness without masculine direction. So rise into the man you were meant to be. A man who is kind but firm, loving but strong, open but grounded, still but unshakably alive. Because when you eliminate these 7 subtle weaknesses, you don't just attract women, you attract respect. You attract trust, you attract devotion. And that's the kind of man the world, and she, will never forget. Women are constantly observing, not in a judgmental way, but in an instinctive, intuitive way. They are wired to scan for strength, not just in muscles or status, but in energy, consistency, and internal alignment. Every time you speak, every time you walk into a room, every time you're under pressure, she's picking up on something far deeper than words. She's watching how you carry yourself, not just posture and voice, but the energy behind it. Do you enter the room with quiet confidence or nervous tension? Do you lead conversations or wait to be led? Do you hold space when tension rises, or do you collapse into anxiety? She watches how you respond to stress. Not just when things are going well, but when things start to fall apart, because that's when your real strength is revealed. And most of all, she's feeling whether your words match your energy. Do you speak like a king but move like a servant? Do you say you're confident while your eyes beg for approval? Do you project certainty, or are you leaking fear beneath the surface? You need to understand this. Weakness to a woman isn't always about physicality. It's energetic, how centered you are. It's emotional, how consistent and safe your presence feels. It's psychological, whether you're living from truth or reacting out of fear. Because here's the truth: most men don't want to hear a woman may be attracted to your looks. She may be impressed by your words. But she only respects and trusts you when your masculine energy is congruent and unwavering. That's the difference between being temporarily interesting and being undeniably magnetic. So stop thinking strength is about domination. It's not about barking orders, puffing your chest, or chasing validation. It's about how deeply you're anchored in yourself. It's about how calmly you walk through fire. It's about whether your presence makes her nervous or makes her feel like she can finally breathe. And she knows the difference in seconds. That's how tuned in women are. That's how sensitive they are to your energy. And that's why, if you want her respect, her attraction, her devotion, you must first command those things from within. Most men don't even realize it, but they're leaking weakness all the time. Not through loud, obvious mistakes, but through subtle behaviors that slip under the radar of their awareness, but never under the radar of a woman's intuition. It shows up in their neediness, that constant hunger for attention, validation, reassurance. They text too often. They overthink every reply. They can't sit with silence. They feel anxious if she pulls away even slightly. And they chase, overcompensate, or beg for closeness. That's not love. That's fear. And women feel it. It shows up in approval seeking. The way they try to be the perfect guy. Always agreeable, never disagreeing, never leading. Always adapting to her moods, her opinions, her expectations, at the cost of their own truth. They think they're being respectful, but what they're really being is spineless. And to a woman, that's deeply unattractive. Then there's emotional inconsistency, a man who one day is confident and clear, and the next day is moody, reactive, insecure. She never knows what version of him she's going to get, and that emotional unpredictability doesn't excite her. It exhausts her. Because women are not drawn to chaos, they are drawn to consistency, clarity, and containment. Here's the harsh truth: every time you show up from a place of emotional weakness, when your words don't match your energy, when your confidence is a mask, when your need for her overshadows your sense of self, you're silently telling her, I don't fully have med, so I need you to hold me together. And the moment she feels that, attraction dies, respect dissolves, trust evaporates. Because she doesn't want to lead the relationship. She doesn't want to feel like the stronger one. She doesn't want to become your emotional parent. She wants to relax. She wants to feel safe. And she can't if you keep leaking need, approval, and instability in small but constant ways. So if you want her to trust you, desire you, surrender to you, it starts by sealing those leaks, by reclaiming your center, by leading yourself first. So you don't need her to do it for you. When you become truly aware of these 7 signs of weakness, and not just aware, but brutally honest about where they live in you, everything starts to shift. You stop operating from habit and start moving from intention. You begin to notice those moments when you're slipping into neediness, when you're trying to impress, when you're shrinking just to avoid discomfort. And instead of reacting blindly, you pause, you breathe, you realign. And that's when something powerful happens. You begin to embody what most men never even touch: quiet strength, emotional control, grounded masculinity. Not the kind of strength that screams for attention, not the fake alpha energy that's all bark and no depth, but the kind of calm, steady presence that speaks without speaking, that commands without controlling, that holds space when everything around you is chaotic. That's the kind of man women crave, not because he's perfect, but because he's anchored. He doesn't flinch under pressure. He doesn't chase what he can attract. He doesn't lose himself trying to keep someone else. And here's the truth. Most women have never felt that kind of energy in a man. They've met charm, they've met bravado, they've met manipulation and performance. But to meet a man who is real, still, and fully in his frame, that's rare. That's unforgettable. When you eliminate these subtle weaknesses, you don't need to win her over. You become the kind of man she naturally respects, desires, and trusts, without her even knowing why. Because her body, her heart, and her intuition all say the same thing. This is a man I can follow. This is a man I can open to. This is a man who won't collapse. And that's not something you fake. That's something you become. Through awareness, through mastery, through walking the path of true masculine leadership, starting with yourself.